Picture this: Northern France, the Western Front, December of 1914. The world has been at war for barely 5 months, yet the earth already feels ancient with pain. You are knee-deep in frozen mud, your breath turning to shards of ice in the air. The wind bites your exposed skin, and every movement echoes in the silence between gunfire. The sun has died early, swallowed by endless clouds, and night crawls over the trenches like a living fog. The trench stinks of damp wool, of unwashed fear, of something between rot and smoke. You press your back against cold sandbags, fingers trembling not just from the cold, but from exhaustion so deep it feels like part of your blood. Somewhere beyond the wire, you hear a muffled cry, neither human nor animal, but the kind that makes the skin crawl because you recognize it anyway. It belongs to someone praying not to die tonight. The ground is scarred, wounded by days of shelling and nights of screaming. Once it was farmland, dotted with hedgerows and the laughter of children. Now, it is a gray wasteland where even the crows hesitate to land. The silence between explosions has become its own kind of sound, heavier than thunder, shaped by the weight of waiting. You were told this war would be over by Christmas, that your courage would carve a new dawn for civilization. Instead, Christmas has come to you in the shape of a grave. You wipe your nose with a frozen sleeve. Your rifle rests against the wall beside you, useless for warmth and heavy with rusted faith. The men nearby have fallen quiet. Even their jokes have ghosts behind them now. Somewhere along the trench, a small candle flickers inside a tin, and for a moment it feels like a sin. Light attracts attention, and attention means death. Yet no one dares to blow it out, as if the flame itself were the last act of rebellion. This is not a place for dreams, or birthdays, or Christmas bells. It is a kingdom of mud, ruled by silence, where the only gifts exchanged are bullets. And yet beneath the gunmetal sky, something strange begins to happen. It starts as a murmur, a faint melody carried by the wind, impossible to place. You wonder if your mind is playing tricks again, as it often does after too many sleepless nights. You tilt your head, listening. The sound comes from the darkness beyond the wire, from the enemy trench, less than 100 yards away. A voice hums a tune, low, hesitant, but unmistakably familiar. You cannot understand the words, but you know the song. It's a carol, a Christmas carol. Your heart stutters. You were taught that the men on the other side are monsters, that they are the reason for this chaos. But monsters do not sing. Monsters do not remember melodies from childhood or risk snipers just to hum against the night. You look at the faces around you. Disbelief, confusion, a flicker of hope so fragile it almost hurts to see. One of your comrades whispers, "Are they mocking us?" No one answers. The song grows louder, clearer. You catch the syllables now, foreign yet tender, words that translate themselves inside your chest without needing language. It's Silent Night. And then, impossibly, another voice joins from your side, softly at first, shaking with nerves and emotion, but true. Two sets of voices now, two nations locked in hatred, singing across the no man's land. Somewhere behind you, an officer hisses for silence, but his voice carries no authority anymore. The music has already crossed every line. The cold seems to soften, the darkness to listen. You close your eyes, and for the first time in months, you remember something other than the smell of gunpowder. You remember home. The fire that once warmed your fingers. The sound of your mother laughing. The glow of a church window by candlelight. The singing fades into the murmur of wind, leaving a silence more powerful than any gunshot. Minutes pass. You think it's over. That reason has returned. But then you hear a shout, not of anger, but of invitation. A voice from the opposite trench calls out in broken English, "You no shoot, we no shoot." The words hang in the air, absurd and divine. You could almost laugh if your throat weren't locked in fear. Someone beside you mutters, "They want a truce?" He spits, but there's no conviction in the gesture. The order from command is clear. No fraternization. And yet, what is command compared to this? Men in rags asking not to die on Christmas Eve? The higher orders are miles away, seated before warm fires, while you and these unseen voices share the same mud, the same hunger, the same nightmares. The silence becomes unbearable. One of your men, Private Andrews, stands up halfway, raising his cap on his bayonet. He holds it high, trembling. Nothing happens. Then, from the enemy line, another cap rises in answer. A few moments later, a head appears. Then another. The unthinkable is happening. Soldiers climbing from their graves to look one another in the face. The night holds its breath. No shots, no shouts. Only the sound of snow beginning to fall, soft as ash from a dying world. White flakes land on your sleeve, melting instantly against your skin. You exhale, realizing that for this one moment, the war has forgotten itself. The man across the field waves. You can see his outline, his helmet rim catching the faint starlight. He calls again, "Merry Christmas!" The accent is thick, but the message slices through the dark like a bell. Someone behind you whispers, "Answer him." Another voice says, "To hell with orders, Merry Christmas." The words tumble out into the open, echoing against the frost and barbed wire. Laughter follows, quiet at first, then louder. The kind of laughter that sounds like release, not joy. The kind born from disbelief that you are still alive to feel anything at all. The enemy waves once more, and this time someone throws a small package. It lands near the center of the field. You watch as one of your soldiers crawls out to retrieve it, bracing for gunfire that never comes. He returns holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Chocolate, cigarettes, maybe a note. Your chest tightens. Something ancient stirs inside. The recognition of shared humanity buried beneath uniforms and propaganda. For months you've been told there are no men, only sides. But tonight, as those voices echo through the frost, you sense that all of you are simply broken mirrors reflecting the same sky. The cold gnaws at your fingers, yet you cannot move. You are afraid to breathe, afraid that even a small sound might wake the war again. Somewhere beyond your sight, the carol begins once more. Fainter this time, but real. A fragile bridge of sound stretched across 1,000 bodies buried between you. This is not peace. It is something rarer. It is the pause between heartbeats, the whisper before dawn, the fragile moment when the world remembers what it means to be alive. Tomorrow the shelling will return. Tomorrow the mud will drink again. But tonight, in this forgotten corner of the earth, the frost itself seems to listen. You stare into the darkness, and somehow it doesn't stare back. For a fleeting instant, the front ceases to exist. The universe contracts into the narrow field where strangers stand in the same snow, under the same indifferent moon. Above all else, there is silence. The kind of silence that feels holy, or maybe haunted. This night will not make it into the reports or the speeches. Command will call it a weakness, a lapse in discipline, a foolish sentiment. But you know better. You have seen men turn their fear into something like grace. You have seen enemies sing the same hymn to the same winter heavens. You have seen the war forget itself. The candle inside the tin still burns. Around it, the frost thickens, and the wind carries faint echoes of the song into the night. You close your eyes, letting the sound wash through you. The harmony of despair and hope intertwined. Before we continue, if you believe these forgotten moments of light in the darkest places deserve to be remembered, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support keeps the candle lit and allows us to keep exploring the shadows of history. Tonight, we descend even deeper into the frozen trenches. We will trace how this fragile peace came to be, how men risked everything to honor it, and how those few hours of grace terrified the powers that ruled them. You may think you know the story of the Christmas Truce, but the truth, like the frost, hides its secrets in silence. You have heard the story before, though perhaps not like this. They call it the Christmas Truce, a miracle in the mud. A brief moment when the guns fell silent and soldiers remembered they were human. But that is only the surface, the frost that hides the frozen world beneath. What happened in those trenches was not a quaint legend about peace on earth. It was a rebellion against the machine that demanded men forget what they were. Forget the sentimental postcards, the soft colors and angels. Forget the smiling soldiers shaking hands in daylight as if the war had simply paused for civility. That image was born after the fact, when those far from the front needed a story clean enough to print. The reality was darker, stranger, and more dangerous to the order that kept the war alive. What took place on that night was not permission. It was defiance. You were told it began with song, with candles, with courage. In truth, it began with hunger. Weeks of cold and filth had stripped away any pretense left in these men. They were not knights of any crusade, but tired human bodies rotting from the inside out. Lice had become their silent companions, and frostbite had claimed fingers and toes. They no longer dreamed of victory. They dreamed of warmth. To understand the truce, you must first understand the darkness that preceded it. The winter of 1914 was merciless. Food arrived frozen or spoiled. The dead were buried in shallow graves or left to stiffen in no man's land, where shrapnel still glittered like frost. Gun barrels froze to hands. Boots cracked open until skin fused with leather. Every dawn brought new corpses half covered in snow. Hope itself felt like another casualty. And yet, in that world of iron and mud, imagination refused to die. Rumors spread down the trenches like whispered prayers. Some claimed the enemy had received special shipments of sausages and beer for Christmas. Others said their officers had promised a temporary halt to allow the dead to be retrieved. Men clung to these rumors like driftwood in a gray ocean. Anything that sounded human was worth believing. Still, the truth came not from orders, but from exhaustion. It came from the simple realization that killing had lost its meaning. Most soldiers on both sides were little more than boys, with faces chiseled by fear. They wrote letters to mothers, to women they would never see again, to children unborn. And into those envelopes, they poured something the war could not command: remorse. Between gunfire, they began to imagine the faces of the men they were told to hate. This is not the story of enemy and ally. It is the story of mirrors facing one another across a field of corpses. What one side sang, the other knew. What one side longed for, the other shared. The truce was not born from politics or faith, but from the terrible intimacy of mutual suffering. It was men whispering to themselves, "If we are all in hell, then why keep building the fire?" The newspapers would later soften this truth because it frightened them. The idea that obedience could fracture in the face of simple humanity was intolerable. To admit that compassion could seize the front lines was to admit that war itself might be nothing more than an illusion built on command. So they called it a miracle, a Christmas story, a brief flicker of civilization amid the darkness. But miracle was just another word for disobedience they could not explain. Imagine what it meant to risk punishment, even death, simply to speak to the enemy. Letters recovered from soldiers after the event told of fear. Not fear of combat, but fear of generals, fear of being labeled a traitor for refusing to shoot at men who sang the same hymns. This was no staged act of diplomacy. It was spontaneous, fragile, carried out by those who had lost faith in the orders, shouted from far behind the lines. The official war machine thrived on dehumanization. Leaflets described the enemy as beasts, monsters, shadows that fed on cruelty. To hesitate at the sight of a uniform was considered weakness. Yet in that frozen December, hesitation became salvation. It took more courage to lower a rifle than to fire it. The truce was not cowardice. It was the purest act of bravery the war would ever see. The legend you know speaks of soccer matches and laughter, of pipes shared between the barbed wire. But beneath the warmth lies another story. The truce was not universal. In some places, the guns never stopped. In others, seconds of silence ended in tragedy as nervous men mistook gestures for traps. The truce existed only where conscience outweighed command, and that made it fragile, ephemeral, and all the more sacred. When dawn rose over the battlefield, eyes accustomed to blood saw something impossible. Men walking upright, exposed, and still breathing. They exchanged gifts not because they were instructed to, but because they needed proof that kindness had not frozen inside them. Bits of chocolate, tobacco, tinned meat. Currency in a world where everything had lost its value. Across languages, one message repeated: today, no killing. You might think this tale ends in triumph, but the truth darkens as you look closer. Commanders soon learned what had happened and were horrified. Reports arrived from the front describing fraternization, laughter, and cooperation. The upper ranks recognized immediately that such contact endangered the purpose of war. Soldiers who see each other as human are harder to control. This is the part history politely forgets. In the days following Christmas, men who had joined the truce were reassigned to different sectors. Discipline became harsher. New orders forbade any contact with the enemy beyond combat. Officers threatened execution for anyone who crossed the wire again. All traces of peace had to be buried under the return of gunfire. Yet even punishment could not erase the memory. Something had awakened inside those who participated. A dangerous knowledge that obedience was not the same as honor. Some later wrote that they fired their rifles into the air when ordered to resume attack. Others found themselves unable to aim straight at faces that had once smiled back. For a moment, moral clarity had invaded the trenches, and it refused to die quietly. This is not a tale about Christmas cheer surviving amidst chaos. It is a story of rebellion dressed in song. That night, the soldiers broke the first law of modern war: depersonalization. They looked at the enemy and found themselves reflected. The frost-covered battlefield became a mirror instead of a weapon. In that reflection, the concept of war cracked. Behind every verse of carol lay a question unspoken. Who are we fighting, and why? Beneath the smiles and shaky handshakes was despair deeper than any trench. The truce did not heal them, it exposed the wound. For one silent evening, they tasted what it meant to choose compassion over compulsion, and that taste carried the bitterness of knowing it could never last. The world beyond the front preferred a prettier myth. They wanted to believe that civilization had merely flickered for a night, not that its very foundation trembled. But the soldiers knew otherwise. They had touched something forbidden, the realization that humanity can survive even in engineered hell. And from that moment, no sermon or slogan could fully blind them again. There is a kind of courage that history does not reward. It does not wear medals or feature in parades. It whispers instead in frost and fear, choosing mercy in defiance of order. The truce belonged to that kind of courage. When men sang into the dark, they did not summon angels. They summoned themselves. If you believe these hidden truths, these uncomfortable miracles deserve to be remembered, like this video and subscribe. Your support keeps the candle burning against the chill of forgetting. Tonight, we will cross deeper into that forbidden silence and witness how the truce unfolded. How for a few stolen hours, soldiers on both sides risked everything to become human again. The night deepens and the frost thickens until every breath becomes a small ghost. You can feel the air changing, not warmer, not softer, but different. Across the shattered field, the gunfire has stopped. The world has gone still, as though the war itself has paused to breathe. The soldiers on both sides remain hidden in their trenches, hearts pounding not from fear anymore, but from something stranger: expectation. Someone lights another candle, then another. Soon the line of flames stretches like a feeble constellation along the trench. Each one flickers in defiance of logic, tiny suns glowing against the night. You realize that these men are performing a ritual they have forgotten how to name. They are lighting hope in a place where hope should be forbidden. The candles are not gifts from command. They are scavenged from rations, from prayer kits, from remnants of churches left in ruins. The wax drips onto helmets and fingers, burning slightly but bringing no pain. Men place the lights on the edges of sandbags, on crates, even in bayonet sockets. The glow softens the faces around you, turning each soldier into something almost human again. They are not supposed to see one another in full light. Darkness has been the rule, an ally and a prison. Yet now light spills across no man's land, crossing the barbed wire like an unspoken invitation. The men stare silently at the distant glimmering, realizing that the enemy is doing the same. It is not strategy, it is sacrament. Without knowing it, they are part of the same ceremony. The ritual begins with the smallest of offerings. A song drifts over once more, and someone joins in, this time louder. Voices multiply, merging into imperfect harmony carried by frozen breath. The melody rises, trembling, beautiful in its frailty. The sound turns the battlefield into a chapel made of mud and fear. Soldiers who can barely remember why they fight, remember every word of the carols. The verses become confessions whispered into the frost. The English sing, "God rest ye merry," and the Germans answer with "Stille Nacht." The melodies weave together, the languages dissolving into shared reverence. For a few fleeting minutes, religion becomes rebellion, and faith becomes disobedience. You look around and realize something extraordinary. Men are smiling, teeth cracked, lips bleeding, but smiling nonetheless. For the first time in months, the laughter does not sound like despair. It sounds like survival. Two soldiers on your left start humming louder, as if daring the darkness to object. From the far trench, a lantern waves slowly, 3 times, then twice again. Behind you, a murmur runs through the line. Someone says, "They're inviting us." The officers hesitate. The moon is rising, round and pale, an indifferent witness to the madness below. The light paints the field with silver, and for a moment it looks untouched, pure again. Still, fear lingers. You imagine snipers waiting, fingers tightening on triggers. The ritual teeters on the edge of disaster. One wrong move and the illusion will shatter. Yet the men lean forward, driven by something stronger than fear. A desire not to be alone. A private from your company, barely 20 years old, climbs carefully onto the parapet. He stretches out one hand above the trench. No bullets fly. From the opposing side, a silhouette mimics the gesture. A quiet gasp fills the air. The unthinkable has begun. Slowly, men begin to crawl from their ditches, boots sinking into the frozen earth. They move like ghosts, unsure if they are still alive. One German soldier carries a small, twisted tree branch. He sticks a candle at its top. The others follow, holding tins, biscuits, and whatever remains of their dignity. They cross the space that only hours before had been full of lead and screams. You rise too, unable to resist the invisible gravity pulling everyone toward that center. The ground feels alien beneath your boots, as though it absorbs every step with disbelief. Around you, the other soldiers move in silence, their faces oddly peaceful, their movements careful not to break the fragile spell. In the middle of no man's land, the first meeting occurs. Gloves touch. Voices whisper words neither side properly understands. The ritual completes its transformation, from simple survival to communion. For a heartbeat, the world forgets that these men have spent months trying to destroy one another. The gifts are humble: a piece of bread, a cigarette, a button from a uniform. But to those who give and receive, these are relics. Proof that humanity has not been requisitioned by the war. One man removes a scarf and sets it gently over the shoulders of an opponent who forgot his. They exchange names. No ranks, no orders, only names. Further down the line, another soldier produces a harmonica. The first notes tremble, hesitant, but soon others join: accordion, violin, voices. Songs bloom in the cold air and rise toward the stars. What was once an empty battlefield becomes a strange festival in the dead of night. Each flame, each song, becomes a prayer for something no commander would understand. The ritual is not of peace, but remembrance. They are not celebrating victory. They are acknowledging that none exists. The gift of this night is not the end of war, but the proof that even war cannot end everything. As minutes stretch into hours, the fear begins to fade. The candlelight spreads until it paints the snow gold. You can feel it reflecting in your eyes, warming the space behind your ribs where hope had long since died. For the first time in so long, you can breathe without seeing your breath as a cloud of despair. The ritual deepens. The exchange of small treasures turns into shared prayer. Some kneel, others stand with heads bowed, words carried in whispers across the field. No guns, no commands, only the murmur of hearts remembering how to beat. In that moment, even the stars seem to lean closer to listen. Imagine how it feels to stand before the enemy unarmed and realize he is praying for the same thing you are: survival. The ritual has turned the entire front line into a cathedral without walls, without priests, built from will alone. Each man becomes a candle, each look across the frozen ground, a psalm. Back in the trenches, those who remain watching cannot tell whether the scene is real or a mirage. The melody drifts closer, mingled with laughter they barely recognize. It feels unholy in its holiness, a crime against the machinery of war. But even they, hardened and cold, cannot help but watch with silent envy. You feel time bending. The night refuses to end, as if daylight itself hesitates to intrude on such an impossible scene. The air smells faintly of tobacco and candle smoke instead of cordite and rot. The frost glitters under the moonlight like spilled starlight, fragile and eternal all at once. A German sergeant offers his photograph to a British private, a small black and white portrait of a woman holding a child. The British soldier nods, and for the first time, he smiles without bitterness. He takes from his pocket a small letter, showing his own family's faces. There are no words enough for this exchange, only the understanding that every man here belongs somewhere that is not this war. The officers who witness it stand frozen, torn between awe and dread. They know this act is forbidden, but how do you forbid light from burning? The ritual has become autonomous, older than the war that tried to control it. No order can undo what has been seen tonight. The candles burn lower, wax dripping onto the snow. Men speak softly, some in English, others in German or French. Yet the meaning is universal. The ritual has no language, no borders, no command. It is a quiet rebellion written in flame. Soon the men begin to retreat slowly back to their trenches, not because they want to, but because dawn whispers of duty yet unfulfilled. They know what waits for them in daylight: the orders, the noise, the blood. But before leaving, many glance backward one last time, committing the sight to memory, the sight of light shared between enemies. Before the last candle dies, you realize what this ritual truly means. It is the act of remembering the sacred within the profane, of choosing light where the world commands shadow. In this war, illumination is not victory, it is survival. The men have baptized the night in defiance, sanctifying the unsanctioned. Before we continue, if you believe these forgotten gestures of humanity deserve to be remembered, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support keeps the candle burning, so we can keep exploring the shadows where light once dared to shine. When we return, we will walk into that impossible peace. The one night when the war truly stopped breathing and enemies became brothers beneath the frozen stars. The frost has turned the earth into glass beneath your boots. Every step emits a faint crunch, a fragile sound that seems too loud in the sacred silence. Around you, dozens of figures move through the haze, their breath rising like incense, their faces brightened by candlelight and disbelief. No one speaks loudly. No one commands. For the first time in months, the world is led by quiet rather than orders. There are no lines now, no front or back. Only a gathering of men whose uniforms have lost their meaning. Rifles lie abandoned on the frozen ground, bayonets dulled by cold. A gentle snow falls, softening the landscape until even the barbed wire looks harmless. The battlefield, once a scar, has become a field again. Some soldiers have brought small offerings, scraps of chocolate, cigarettes, tins of jam. They trade without haggling, smiling shyly like boys meeting for the first time. The English offer tea, the Germans offer tobacco. The exchange itself feels like sorcery, an alchemy of kindness transforming survival into ceremony. Someone rolls a small, battered ball onto the snow. It's not much, more a bundle of rags tied with string than a real football. Yet laughter follows it as if it were gold. Within seconds, men are running, unarmed, reckless, free. Their boots kick up white dust, and shouts of joy echo across the no man's land, like music. The game has no score and no sides. Every touch of the ball is an act of defiance. From the trenches, others watch in wonder, afraid to believe what they see. The officers do not intervene. Perhaps even they cannot bear to shatter the illusion. You feel the rhythm of the play pulse through the cold air, each movement proof that life still exists beneath the uniform. Men collide, laugh, pick one another up. The same hands that once gripped rifles now steady strangers. Nearby, a makeshift table emerges. A plank of wood balanced over two crates. From somewhere, someone produces a bottle, its contents muddy and mysterious. Cups are passed around. An unmistakable cheer rises like breath over the frozen field. Every sip burns, not just from alcohol, but from the reckless feeling of being forgiven by the night. The carols begin again, but now they are sung together. Choirs form and dissolve, languages twining like smoke. Silent night drifts through the still air, crossing tongues and hearts until the words lose borders altogether. The melody echoes against what remains of the trees, carries into the trenches, and lingers in the shadows where death usually waits. You look around and recognize the truth. This is not celebration, but resurrection. Each sound, each smile, is an act of rebellion against despair. The war that claimed ownership of every heartbeat has been denied for a single night. The front, for all its violence, has become a sanctuary. The soldiers kneel on the same snow that only hours before had been soaked in blood. In the dim light, two men exchange family photographs. One shows a wife standing beside a baby carriage. The other shows a young girl holding a doll. They trade them gently, each man tracing the faces with a gloved finger. They understand each other perfectly without using words. In a world governed by orders, this unspoken language feels divine. Somewhere to the left, an older soldier hums quietly to himself. You realize he is crying, though his face is turned away. He lights another candle and places it beside his rifle, like a votive offering to the ghosts who did not live to see this night. For a few seconds, the earth seems to hear him. The winds soften, the snow slows, and the horizon glows faintly, silver on blue. The laughter wanes as the men grow quieter, the weight of the moment sinking in. A few sit on overturned crates, heads bowed. They are not praying exactly, but remembering. The frozen soil beneath them hides so many names, so many faces that never had a chance to smile again. The living are only borrowing the silence from the dead. You sit down beside a German soldier whose name you do not know. He offers a cigarette. The smoke curls upward, thin and gray, joining the clouds above. For a moment, you both look at the sky, and you realize how small this battlefield truly is compared to the empty cold of the universe. 2 grains of dust, sharing warmth in defiance of eternity. Across the field, the ball game ends with laughter scattered like bells. Men clap one another on the back, and someone shouts, "Good game!" The words are awkward, accented, almost absurd, but they carry meaning no translation could hold. It is the laughter of survivors who have remembered what joy sounds like. From the trenches behind, an officer calls for restraint, his voice trembling between duty and disbelief. He does not fire, and none obey the command to retreat. Authority has dissolved under the snow. The soldiers understand instinctively that this hour, this fragile peace, belongs to them alone. It is the first thing they have owned since the war began. As night deepens, the lights grow fainter. The candles burn down to stubs, yet no one wants to leave. The men linger, unwilling to release the moment back into time. They know that dawn will come too soon and bring with it the mechanical rhythm of killing once more. But for now, the silence stretches wide enough to carry hope. In the distance, church bells from a shattered village ring faintly in the wind. The sound barely reaches, but it is enough to anchor the dream. No sermon has ever carried such weight. No mass ever united so many enemies in faith. These men have not rediscovered religion tonight. They have created it anew, shaped from mud and moonlight. The hours drift by unnoticed. Someone starts to dig small holes, not for defense, but to bury the dead lying between the lines. It has taken this unnatural peace for them to tend to their fallen. Enemies work side by side, moving shapes stiff with ice, whispering whatever prayers they know. The field begins to look strangely clean again, like a memory being prepared for sleep. You realize how surreal it is, that compassion requires such danger to exist, that it takes war itself to reveal the meaning of peace. The men who dig will be enemies tomorrow. They know this and dig anyway. They are burying both corpses and illusions. When the work is done, each man stands in silence. The snow continues its descent like a curtain closing on the impossible. The stars lean closer, their light scattering off helmets and tears alike. Time itself seems to slow, unwilling to intrude on such fragile harmony. One of the German soldiers speaks softly, his breath forming clouds that vanish too quickly. You do not understand the words, but you know their meaning. He is saying goodbye before it is required. You respond in kind, the simple English syllables falling heavy between you. The war has not ended. It has merely forgotten itself for an instant. Soon the quiet becomes unbearable, heavy with what both sides fear to acknowledge. The spell is breaking. The candles sink into darkness, their wax surrendered to the snow. One by one, men begin their slow retreat toward their trenches. No one looks back at first, afraid the sight might undo them. Then one soldier stops, turns, and raises his hand across the distance. A last salute between ghosts. You cannot tell whether to weep or smile. The air is thick with something unnamed, a mixture of beauty and grief. You walk backward until the edge of the trench swallows you again. Behind you, the others follow, each carrying the silence, like a wound they will never speak of. Back in the safety of mud and shadow, the night appears unreal, a dream too tender to belong to this place. Yet the smell of smoke, the echo of laughter, and the faint shimmer of footprints across the snow testify that it happened. The war forgot itself for one night, and the world kept spinning. Tomorrow, the sound of gunfire will return. Orders will be restored, and this small piece of heaven will be deemed improper, unmilitary, impossible. But truth has a way of outlasting rules. Deep down, every soldier now knows the secret, that peace is not born of victory, but of the moment one man dares to meet another without hate. If you believe this night deserves to be remembered, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support keeps the candle burning, ensuring these fleeting lights of humanity will never be swallowed by history's shadows. Next, we will face the inevitable dawn, the silence that terrified the generals and the orders that buried the truce beneath obedience once more. The morning after the truce arrives, like punishment. The same field that had glowed under stars now lies cloaked in mist and shame. The snow seems different, heavier, as if it knows too much. You wake to the shrill whistle of commands, the sound of order returning like a disease. The war, once hushed by song and candlelight, begins to clear its throat again. Officers move down the trenches with sharp voices, their boots splashing in the thawing mud. Their faces are pale with disbelief and suppressed fury. Reports of fraternization have already reached headquarters, carried by frightened men who did not dare to step forward themselves. The silence of the night before, the peace that had dared to bloom, has become evidence of insubordination. The generals cannot understand what frightened them so deeply. They have seen mutiny, desertion, and defeat. But this spontaneous mercy was a different kind of threat. It revealed that loyalty can bend, that obedience is not absolute, that even in the machinery of war, there exists a spark that refuses to bow. Humanity, it seems, is contagious. The men are gathered for inspection. The air smells of tobacco and fear. An officer asks whether anyone spoke to the enemy. Eyes stay low, hands tighten on rifles, and lips remain sealed. The truth is too dangerous to confess. What occurred last night was both beautiful and forbidden. A communion outside command. From the rear, the first telegrams arrive, stiff with outrage. Words like treason and discipline appear underlined in black ink. The higher ranks demand immediate restoration of hostility, as if violence were a kind of medicine that must be administered promptly to cure compassion. The soldiers read the orders in silence, the paper trembling between numb fingers. One officer walks the trench, reciting the general's command. Fraternization with the enemy will be considered an act of betrayal. The phrase sounds absurd, hollow against the echo of laughter still lingering in the air. No one argues, but the obedience now feels broken, hollowed out by knowledge. They have looked across the field and seen men, not monsters. That morning, the guns roar again. A single shot pierces the wind, and both trenches flinch as if struck. Instinct takes over. Training resumes. But something has changed. Each bullet fired carries hesitation. Each explosion sounds like an apology. The war resumes its rhythm, but its music feels discordant now, unfitting in the memory of that quiet symphony. Across the lines, soldiers write in diaries, their handwriting shaky, the ink frozen at its edges. They describe the truce as a dream or a spell, something that arrived without warning and departed without farewell. They write about faces they can no longer dehumanize, voices that still ring clear in their minds. The truce has not ended, not entirely. It survives in guilt. Command cannot imprison such thoughts, but it tries. Men who speak too fondly of the event are reassigned to harsher fronts. Letters home mentioning the truce vanish in censorship offices. Reports are rewritten to sound harmless, and the story becomes rumor. The generals are afraid, not of the enemy, but of an idea, that the soldiers might remember they have the power to choose. Behind the lines, propaganda begins to spread once more. Posters appear calling the enemy devils, barbarians, animals. Hatred must be rekindled for the machine to function. Yet now every man who joined the truce knows the lie. He has stood in no man's land and shaken the hand of a supposed demon and found a heartbeat instead. One commander, faced with confusion among his men, orders an artillery barrage across the same field where the truce had unfolded. The shells fall upon footprints, on the graves of those newly buried, on the lingering warmth of peace. It is not strategy, it is erasure. The message is clear. What happened last night must never happen again. You imagine the soldiers watching from the trenches as the earth explodes once more. Their lights extinguished, their gifts crushed beneath the noise. The war reclaims its dominion, cruel and jealous. But in their eyes remains something indestructible, a memory that cannot be ordered out of existence. Every man who survived that night understands a new kind of silence, the silence that followed the first shot. It was not the quiet of peace or fear, but mourning. The realization that the fragile miracle had died by dawn. The world had been shown its reflection and recoiled. In distant headquarters, superiors analyze reports as though dissecting a contagion. They discuss morale, control, structure. Not one paper mentions love or mercy. The truce is transformed into a myth before it has even cooled. Edges are sanded, details blurred. What cannot be explained is expunged. But myths, unlike orders, tend to survive. In the weeks that follow, the front hardens again. Reinforcements arrive, younger, more obedient, untouched by what happened. The men who witnessed the truce speak of it rarely, almost fearfully. At night they stare across the field and wonder if the others are still there, singing quietly in their hearts. Between bursts of fire, they imagine what it would sound like if the songs began again. You can sense the war's hunger returning, slow and greedy. New offensives are planned, casualties mount, and the ground drinks deeply once more. Yet beneath every fresh layer of blood sleeps the memory of that single night. It is buried like a seed, silent, invisible, patient. Command writes new doctrines about loyalty and morale. Orders grow stricter. Officers warn that compassion is a weapon of the enemy. To hesitate, to sympathize, to falter in hatred is to betray one's country. These are the tools of fear, sharpened by shame. The men listen, but inside, the echo of shared laughter persists, haunting them in quiet hours. Some of the soldiers begin to question the war openly. A letter home speaks of confusion. If the enemy is human, why are we still killing? The author is transferred the next day. Others find subtler ways to resist, firing into the air, missing on purpose, slowing reloading times. Acts of rebellion so small, yet so costly they amount to prayers whispered against thunder. The generals continue to rage behind their desks, writing more orders, building more walls between memory and obedience. Yet power trembles whenever empathy rises, and that tremor will never fade completely. The silence of that night lives rent-free inside every report, every denial, every speech that insists soldiers must not think. The rhythm of war, shoot, reload, repeat. But even that rhythm is vulnerable. The pause of the truce, a silent reminder of the chaos hiding beneath order, infects the entire structure. The soldiers have a glimpse, a whisper, of what it could be like if the entire war were built on illusions of control. That is what the generals dread. Not the acts of individual men, but the idea that the entire system is fragile. Once compassion is acknowledged, even for a moment, the entire edifice cracks, threatening to collapse in silence and shadows. They called it weakness, sentimentality, even betrayal. But what they truly feared was its purity. A war can survive madness and cruelty, but it cannot survive meaning. It cannot coexist with compassion. To admit that the enemy can sing your song is to admit that the war itself might be wrong. As winter deepens, frost returns to the field and erases the footprints left by that night. The snow falls thick, mercifully covering the scars, the broken gifts, the stains. But memory does not freeze. In the hearts of those who lived it, the silence hums still, a phantom lullaby echoing in the distance. In the weeks that follow, the front hardens again. Reinforcements arrive, younger, more obedient, untouched by what happened. The men who witnessed the truce speak of it rarely, almost fearfully. At night they stare across the field and wonder if the others are still there, singing quietly in their hearts. Between bursts of fire, they imagine what it would sound like if the songs began again. The years moved forward, as years always do, indifferent to the lives buried beneath them. The men who survived that frozen Christmas returned to the rhythm of the war, their hands stained once more by duty. For many, the truce became an ache more than a memory. A whisper they could not speak aloud, lest it be mistaken for weakness. Time, that quiet conspirator, began to bury the story as efficiently as it had buried the dead by the spring of 1915. New faces filled the trenches, young and untouched by the strange peace that had come before. The veterans said little. They carried the memory of those few hours inside themselves, like a smoldering ember hidden beneath ash. They had seen the truth behind the noise, and it changed the way they carried their rifles. Compassion, once lit, is not easily extinguished. Some of those who had crossed the lines during the truce would never see home again. They died days or weeks later, swallowed by the same mud that had witnessed their kindness. Yet something about them lingered, a gentleness in the way they marched, a certain hesitation before pulling the trigger. The ghosts of that night walked beside them, invisible but not absent. When the war finally ended, the world built monuments of stone and marble to the fallen. But no monument was ever made for the silence, for that breath of mercy between explosions. The history books recorded battles, not blessings. The truce became a rumor passed down through letters, hushed in classrooms, dismissed as sentimentality by those who had never seen a comrade shake hands with the enemy beneath a frozen moon. In that understanding lies the truest terror for those who thrive on division. A soldier who has seen the enemy's humanity is no longer a perfect weapon. He becomes something uncontrollable, a man with memory. The generals could suppress letters, punish kindness, and resume the slaughter. But they could not erase the knowledge that compassion existed, even here. The Christmas truce remains a paradox, fragile yet indestructible, ephemeral yet eternal. It asks an unbearable question. If peace was possible once, even for a night, why not again? The memory stands as both hope and accusation. It proves that the abyss is not endless, that even during madness, the heart remembers the sound of its own song. In the modern age, when screens glow brighter than stars and distance feels meaningless, that lesson whispers still. The faces change, the wars evolve, but the pattern repeats. We forget how quickly hatred follows orders, how easily empathy is silenced. Yet every time we light a candle or reach across a divide, we echo those men of 1914. Light is fragile, but so is darkness. The frost may return, but it cannot hold forever. Beneath every field, beneath every era, lies the same truth, that even the smallest act of mercy defies oblivion. The Christmas Truce is not an event composed of uniforms and songs. It is an inheritance passed from those who dared to hope into hands that tremble still. So when you hear the carols this year, let them sound different. Imagine their echoes drifting through a frozen battlefield, carrying voices that risked everything to remind the world what it means to be alive. Do not mistake them for nostalgia. They are warnings, soft but persistent. They remind us that peace, once witnessed, is a responsibility. If you found value in this exploration, like this video and subscribe. Tell me, do you think the truce was a miracle or a rebellion? Which one frightens our world more? Until next time, keep the flame alive, and may your nights be warmer than theirs beneath the frozen stars.